Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to another installment in our reviewed and ranked series. We're halfway through the members of the Fantastic Four, and today we are continuing past that benchmark by having a closer look at Johnny Storm, also known as Human Torch. This character is very interesting and has a lot of very unique characteristics, and we will be sure to cover that in its entirety as we discuss this character at length for the next 20 minutes or so. But before we jump into that analysis, I need you to check and see if you are subscribed to the channel. If you're not, please fix that, especially if you've watched multiple of my videos, especially in this series. I've got daily variety content coming to you, and I really enjoy hearing your feedback on these types of videos, so I would greatly appreciate that if you would do so. And as always, if you find today's video helpful, interesting, and or enjoyable, make sure that you hit that like button. So we're going to start by looking at Human Torch's team build synergies, where we always start with these characters, and Human Torch actually has a better spread in his team build synergies when compared to Mr. Fantastic and Invisible Woman, because he just has a wider variety and synergies that I have a little bit more of a preference for. He has 2 defensive synergies with Family Values and Fantastic Four. He has 1 mastery synergy with Forces of Nature. He has an energy synergy with Wisecracking Warriors, and he has a vitality synergy with Smooth Operators. And like I said, there's a much wider variety here of synergies. It's not spread all the way across the board, but by having 4 different categories that he can acquire, especially having energy and mastery synergies, really helps to pad out the efficiency of your in-game combat and attacking into your opponents, because your abilities become more efficient and you have more energy available to carry out said ability and synergy type attacks. So a lot of things that I put a decent amount of value in. Not the strongest character that we've looked at in this series, but certainly better than the last couple that we've looked at in the past couple of weeks. Moving on to talk a little bit about the base functions of Human Torch's kit. We first have his standard attack sequence, and this actually has 5 different hits because the third button press actually sends out 2 little fireballs that he throws out, but it can kind of slip past you, especially because the first 4 fireballs that he throws out, including that double fireball, doesn't deal any amount of hindrance to the opponent. It will light them on fire a little bit and deal minuscule amounts of ticking damage, but overall Human Torch excels at attacking into his opponents from a little bit of a distance, especially if they are melee-based characters and have to be right up close to you in order to retaliate against you when you are carrying out that attack. The 5th fireball is larger and does have an amount of knockback to it, but overall there's not a whole lot of benefit to the standard attack sequence from Human Torch, because it does leave him vulnerable to follow-ups from his opponents and allows them to close in closer to him as well. Human Torch's heavy attack, on the other hand, is very unique. In the entire cast, there's not any other heavy attack that works this way. So Human Torch, you can continuously hold his heavy attack and he will spew out a jet of flames out in front of him, and he will continue to use this attack for as long as you hold down that button. It doesn't drain out of your energy points, so you can just continue to use the heavy attack as frequently and as long as you want to. And in addition to that, you can actually move around while using that heavy attack, and that is just incredible. If this were one of the, I guess, beam or burn type abilities of his, this would hands down have the DLC Privilege Award. But because I am closing that off to the abilities more specifically, I can't present that in this type of scenario. Just know that it's really awesome that this is an ability that is unique to Human Torch in this game. Human Torch is the second to last character that has a flight mechanic active, which makes sense. That's canonically how he traverses and gets around, and he does really well with that. It's animated about as well as you would expect. I would have thought it to be a little bit more appropriate if there was a little more of a trail that followed him around from where he's just flown from, but I can't really be a beggar at this point because there's nothing that's going to be done to change him, so it just kind of is what it is. The standard caution applies here. As you use the flight mechanic, you do burn through your available energy points, so try not to use this excessively, especially when you're outside of combat and you don't passively regenerate the energy points used by using this ability. Human Torch has a falling aerial that's fairly straightforward. He slams down into the ground, and then the area of impact actually catches fire for a couple of seconds and will continue to deal some chip damage to the opponents that are in that area. There's generally not going to be people right in that vicinity that you drop down on, especially if it's grunt type enemies, because you will push them back and they will be thrown out of the immediate proximity, but you can get some sort of benefit to that from using that in the midst of mini boss characters or mighty type enemies. The trouble with all of that is the sheer fact that he doesn't have any abilities that naturally set him up into using his falling aerial, and as a matter of fact, all of his abilities set up a similar lingering area of effect, so you really get the same benefit from using any ability or synergy from Human Torch as opposed to using his falling aerial. So not a whole lot of areas where it would be practical, though you can always find opportunities to use it. And the block and dodge animation is fairly typical. He has a 2-arm cross brace out in front of him to mitigate incoming blows, and as he maneuvers away from oncoming attacks from his opponents, he will just perform a dash in whichever direction you choose as the directional influence. And it makes sense for his character, and I don't really think there's anything else that you could have really done with this. Maybe a little bit of a spin, but there's no like counter-attacking that happens with the dodge, so it's sufficient for what it's meant to be. Let's pivot over and talk a little bit about Human Torch's abilities. First off, we have the Flash Forward ability, which is your standard run-of-the-mill charge attack, and it's one of the better attacks in Human Torch's kit, specifically when it comes to breaking down the stagger gauges of your opponents. As always, you can continue to hold down this button to kind of charge it up, and you can even adjust the timing of when you are sending out this attack. But if you use it in a synergy type time frame, he will dash forward immediately in the direction that he's facing, or if he's a computer controlled character and happens to be synergized, at that point he may course correct a little bit and turn closer towards whatever character that you are using when that synergy is activated. This ability has the energy attack type, and the charge synergy trait has a C classification to the damage dealt as well as the energy points consumed, and as I mentioned, a very nice rating of A to the stagger damage dealt by this ability. And all but one of Human Torch's abilities gain the same rank up benefits as the move is further advanced. That includes a reduced energy point cost, an increase to the attack damage dealt, an increase to the stagger damage dealt, and finally the reduced chance of the attack being interrupted. Human Torch's second ability is the Fireball. This is a massive fireball that goes out in front of the character, and upon making contact with the ground it will explode and deal some burst damage, hence the burst synergy trait that it possesses. This is one of his better range type attacks outside of his standard attack sequence, and will send some of the smaller grunt opponents flying. And as I mentioned before, this does set up a little bit of a fire field that continues to burn for a couple of seconds and deal some additional chip damage against your opponents. It's a little bit better on the overall damage front, having a B classification to the damage dealt, and then maintaining C classifications to both the energy points consumed as well as the stagger damage dealt. And this attack has the energy attack type and the burst synergy trait. Human Torch's third ability is the controlled burn, and this one is pretty good in terms of what it offers, and I'll go ahead and say that you don't want to let the stats on this fool you too much. Of course, it's more clearly intended as a crowd control type attack, and this ability sets up an ignited ring on the ground that lasts for a considerably longer amount of time. There's not a whole lot of stiff competition across Human Torch's abilities as to which one is really the standout ability, so this one just barely gains that DLC privilege award, and it's mainly due to the fact that it has a lingering hitbox and a fairly wide area of effect. I'd like it a lot better if it stuck around longer, or even had a duration akin to that of the Dangerous Ground from Gambit, but unfortunately it really only has a duration of maybe 5 seconds before it dissipates and diffuses. but for the time that it is around, it does deal a little bit more chip damage as opposed to the other fire fields that are set up by the other abilities that Human Torch has. The controlled burn has the energy attack type and the burn synergy trait, has C classifications to the damage and the energy points consumed, and though it does have a classification of D to the stagger damage dealt, it's not intended to be used as much against characters with high stagger gauges such as those mighty enemies and mini-boss characters, so I'm willing to look past that for this instance based off of it being more of a crowd control type ability. And additionally, this ability is the one that differs slightly with its rank up bonuses, where it still has a reduced energy point cost and an increase to the attack damage dealt, but this will add the fire elements to ally attacks, and that really helps to bolster the in-combat damage that your teammates are capable of putting out, provided that they can gain that fire element on their weaponry. And then it still has the standard reduced chance of the attack being interrupted upon final level up. Human Torch's fourth and final ability is the Rising Heat, and this one is probably the flashiest of his abilities, but it's pretty lackluster in terms of what it actually provides. It's a very standard attack, performing fairly middle of the road when it comes to the abilities that fit into the Slam Synergy trait category. This basically involves Human Torch rising up into the air and then plunging down to strike the ground, and that attacks his surroundings with a shockwave and again sets up a little bit of a fire field that lingers for a few seconds, dealing some chip damage to anyone who's not blasted out of the immediate area of impact upon Human Torch making contact with the ground. This ability has the energy attack type and the Slam Synergy trait, and has C's across the board for the damage, energy points consumed, as well as stagger damage dealt. Now, the Human Torch's extreme attack is very iconic. This is it's a decent attack in terms of the damage that it actually deals, and it has a very wide area of influence, but the reason that it's iconic is because in a lot of iterations of the comics, the movies, anything, you'll see that Human Torch will often leave a parting brand of the Fantastic Four, which is a four contained within a circle, and he draws that in his flame pattern. So that's really kind of a fun thing to see here because it's very faithful to what the character is known for. And after drawing that insignia, he will then create a flaming vortex before going supernova in the very center and blasting out with a high impact heat wave that goes in a spherical area of influence. So being able to pull and hold your opponents in with that flame vortex before that massive burst in the center is a very useful characteristic. It does cause the extreme ability to fall a little bit more into the crowd control type area. That's kind of where Human Torch tends to specialize, but he does have certain attributes that kind of help him in combat against other opponents. So pretty good, all things considered. The big caution with this ability is fairly standard as compared to those with the rest of the cast. He does not move and he does not course correct, so you just need to make sure that you are in an area that you are okay with detonating the attack when you do go to use it in order to get the maximum efficiency out of it. So now that we've had a look at what Human Torch has to offer, we now come to the point of the video where we need to determine where he belongs in our tier list. And he's very flashy, and the representation of the character is faithful to who he's meant to be, but that's not enough to bolster him up into the higher tiers here. So he does fall outside of both S and A tier, unfortunately, which is kind of upsetting because I'd like this character to do more, especially with the somewhat unique mechanics that he does have. But I still feel like he falls well above the lower tiers of this list, and I feel like he's a little bit more efficient than a couple of characters at the bottom of B tier here, which kind of causes a problem because now I've got to expand B tier yet again in order to get him to fit in. But where does he belong in my opinion? I do feel like he's right here within the mid-ground, specifically between Moon Knight and Punisher. Now Punisher, he's a very powerful character, but the heavy projectile-based nature that he has really kind of serves as a detriment to him, and Moon Knight just has abilities that are a little bit more efficient and tailored to dealing consistent and reliable damage as compared with that of Human Torch. But there's still several quirks, mainly the chip damage that he can deal with his flames that are set up with any of his abilities that are used, as well as the fact that he has that incredibly unique heavy attack that is not only mobile but can be used continuously as a pretty decent damage dealing option, especially when you take into consideration that grunt type characters do fall victim to and are staggered out of retaliation when they are under the effect of his heavy attack and the onslaught of close range flames that he shoots out. So we're going to go ahead and expand out this this tier. We're going to see if I can expand or add a couple of rows here, and I should be able to do so. It's just going to take me a couple of clicks. But what do you think? Do you think that I have sold him short? Do you feel like there's things that I'm missing about the character, something that I should reevaluate, or do you feel like he's about where he belongs, or do you even feel like he belongs lower on this list? Be sure to let me know what your thoughts are in the comments down below, and I am going to do a lot of the correction of this tier off camera, and we will see you back next week for the final member of the Fantastic Four before moving into the last two characters in the series. So, thanks so much for your time, and I hope that you have an absolutely fantastic rest of your day.